no sophistication of women or people generally. But there was a lot more happening to women than to men. And I've done research on this, so I've taken out a type of violence women will suffer, which is partition, but it can happen in any form. One, women were subject to the same type of violence as men were, which is shooting, killing. Both sides of the border, three communities were involved in that: the Sikh, the Hindu, and the Muslim. So the extent of the violence that three communities. The women had there was
my person dies, but is this
Yes, that is called that now. Clear.
okay. So one was the general violence, the other was rape. Rape was a very common thing in Pakistan and directed entirely on women. The other was the and that is a crucial thing, that they would cut the breasts of each other community. And this was a way of dishonoring the other community. It was really it's not just dishonor, but हमारी बहुत ये है ना कि इज्जत, the honor issue. And there it was to dishonor the other community. That we are doing this to your women. And also we're seeing that they never reproduce. We're stopping the whole business of reproduction. A fourth was abduction. There was abduction by all communities.
इसके साथ कौन सा बीट वाला थी? अच्छा सफेद हाँ लगा दी
Fourth was training for boys. In other words, families would say, take the boy family and you can take the women. So it's like handing over women as part. That was a boundary system. And the next is that the family itself killing. They were giving suicide pills, saying that if you are dishonored or before you are dishonored, you should take this pill, medication, which was given to every woman carry. So this is the type of violence that we had during partition. A lot of work has been done by feminist funders. In India, with the men and under the same, we did focus in boundaries, we did on the protected women. My own work is more in these 6 lines, that I don't talk just about protected women, but I talk about that as well. And I did my essay on this. So that's my own area of work. Just to give you an example before we get an example is in Kashmir, it still exists. There is a woman whose old daughter named the she was abducted. She ran and during partition, her husband ran off. He left her behind and she was abducted by a Muslim and he brought her up. Maybe they took her. It was not a violent thing, it was just that she was there against the will. And she had a daughter. So she then she was married to this man, and she had 2 children, 2 sons. And the 2 sons were very curious about their mother and the family, etc. But the mother eventually went to India. And they were very conscious they needed to be mother. When the border opened in 2005, when the bus started, the bus service started, they came on the bus to Muzaffarabad. And the people, these sons, asked them when people would come from India to try and find their mother. So they looked around, etc., and they were able to trace her. So these boys then, these men, then actually rang her up and said, we are your children from this end of this side of it. You've had the 2 children that you had. because the abducted women, the government of India and the government of Pakistan send their people out, those that had been abducted, they would re-abduct them and take them back to their home country. Here they took her back, took her back and left her sons. And the two sons grew up without this mother, but very wanting to find this mother. So they eventually found Haiqa. And she was married. She had a child, 2 children there. So now they asked her to come to Pakistan. And she eventually came. And she comes now and spends several months in Pakistan. And then she goes back to India and she's a Sikh. And so she is called Do Dharmon Ki Maa, the mother of 2 religions. And this is the type of violence, this is the type of uncertainty that conflict creates on women. The other thing is that I've worked a lot on how women are involved in peace building. They're involved many times in the way we are being involved today with Indian friends, but it's also that they are involved in actual peacekeeping and looking at the conflict and how conflict is working out into that with women. I was part of the group that worked for the UN to recognize conflict and women's role in peace building. And this was a Security Council resolution that came out in 2005. It's 1325, Resolution 1325, which talks specifically about violence against women and women's peace role, the type of role that women can play. So this, I'm quite proud of the fact that we were one of the organizations that were working towards this. This apart, I have also worked in the whole movement towards the Rome Statute. The Rome Statute establishes the 2 focus as the International Criminal Court, the International Criminal Court, which today is being used against Israel. And they have given a statement against what's happening. They've called them war criminals. So that you must be aware of. But that, 1325 came about because of that. In that also, I was part of the movement for the Rome Statute. So this is, when I talk about peace and women and India, Pakistan, we have to see not only that it's in the borders of India, Pakistan here, and I've been very involved in that at different levels, but it also means that we work together in making international impact. We make it global, and we look at, so we're operating, and I would say to you that you need to operate at many different levels. Operate at this level, connecting up with Indian friends, and together we should work towards making changes in your own government. You should then work together to make changes at international level. I'll stop now and wait for the question.
Thank you so much. So we'll just quickly have introductions of the other speakers. So next one is actually one of my teachers. It's Rochelle Potkar from Mumbai. Rochelle is a prize-winning poet, author, screenwriter from India. She's also one of my teachers from the Between the Lines program at the University of Iowa. Her book paper Asylum was shortlisted for the Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize 2020. Her anthology Coins and River was also shortlisted for the Wise Owl Literary Awards 2025. She's also alumna of the University of Iowa's writing program and the Charles Warren Writers Fellow at the University of Stirling. She was awarded an honorary doctorate in literature by the former President of India. And lastly, she teaches poetry online in the Himalayan Writing Retreat and will soon be teaching Ukrainian students. The next one is a person that Pakistan has seen over and over again, who is Dr. Swarnamalya Ganesh. She's the one who's wearing the mustard. You could call Dr. Swarnamalya the master of all trades. She's a dancer, a scholar, a musician, a teacher, a choreographer, an actor, a public speaker, and a cultural activist. For the past 2 years, she has graced the stage of Fest Festival, Alhambra, with her Bharatanatyam performances. Her seminal work From the Attic showcases research and performance of a multicultural past of the performing arts in music and dance, with Tamil, Persianate, and Sanskrit connections, bridging many communities across South Asia, which help create a platform to dialogue. She taught at UCLA, Ashoka University, and many more. She's an associate professor at Kerala University, India. And last but not the least, we have Dr. Haiqa Nasir from Lahore. She's a dentist and an aesthetic injector by profession from Pakistan. She's been working with feminist collectives in Lahore since 2019 and is a volunteer for Olive March Lahore. She has been raising awareness about violence against women and child sexual assault through her work with Safer Society from Children and his self-defense workshop for the past 6 years. Today, she joins us as a young feminist and a representative of this traffic. So now that the introductions are done, we will be starting with the questions. The first question that I would like each speaker to take only 2 minutes as an introductory question is just to say a bit about what does peace and conflict has meant to you personally, philosophically, at a larger context. Anyway, what does it mean to you? We can start with Dr. Haiqa.
Okay, can everybody hear me fine? Yes, Assalamualaikum. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm obviously very overwhelmed because I feel like there are so many, mashallah, मेरे से काफी ज़्यादा experienced and well-read panelists here. So I am a little bit intimidated. Hopefully my opinions make a difference. But as an answer to your question, when it comes to peace and conflict, this is something that I've thought about a lot, and that has probably really sort of shaped my opinions about the world that we live in. And as children, for us, conflict is, कि लड़ाई हो गई है इसके बीच में, अब क्यों लड़ाई हुई है, किस तरह हुई है, हमें समझ नहीं आती. As we grow older, we understand the nuances of conflict, how it is used to define so many things. आप war को conflict कह रहे हैं, आप genocide को conflict कह रहे हैं, आप माँ बाप की लड़ाई को conflict कह रहे हैं. But conflict ऐसी parties में होते हैं, two parties that have a disagreement, right? And two parties that probably have an equal say in the topic that they're disagreeing about. But we use conflict in a much broader term, especially in the current landscape of the world. जहाँ पे जिसको convenient लगता है, वो उस चीज़ को conflict बना देते हैं, उस चीज़ को genocide बना देते हैं. And especially in the context of Palestine and Kashmir, we've seen it. The denial of genocide and the denial of the atrocities that are being conducted there, and how in the political language these are still referred to as conflicts when these are occupations. These are genocidal occupations. And it's a wake-up call for a lot of us in this generation and in the past generations as well, given we see these things. We're exposed to international media, जिसके बीच में हम देखते होते हैं कि अच्छा हाँ यहाँ पे लड़ाइयाँ होती हैं, फलाने इलाके में ये conflicts वगैरह हो रहे हैं. And once you start questioning it, कि क्यों अभी तक resolve क्यों नहीं हुई, अभी तक इस conflict की कोई resolution नहीं आई, why have they not learned how to solve this problem? And then you realize this problem can't be solved because one party usually doesn't have any say on how to solve this or how to resolve this. So in my personal opinion, or in my personal definition, this is how I view conflict and peace. And I don't think peace can be achieved with just one party overcoming the other. Both need to have an equal amount of say in it, but we also need to learn and educate ourselves about individual conflicts and what those conflicts mean for the people that are being actually affected by them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haiqa. Dr. Swarnamalya, would you like to go next?
Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all my friends who've gathered here. Thank you, Noor, for putting this panel together. What a dynamic afternoon. I'm so happy to be here. I think the idea of peace and conflict are like two sides of a coin. And as a woman, I think one constantly reflects on the idea of peace and the idea of conflict, not merely as concepts, but as lived experiences most of the time in our own lives, right? So I think the personalized lived experience of being a woman feeds a lot into how we perceive peace and conflict. Of course, in the larger political and social understanding of what peace and conflict is, especially in today's world, I think we are forced to think beyond one's own personal experience as well. But in interrogating this relationship between women and peace, we sort of have to recognize a very unequal relationship of power that exists within our societies. In fact, I always think that this whole motherist narrative, and I think that's played out so much in the recent conflict between India and Pakistan, where patriarchal societies sort of prop up women and their position within their societies as sort of a cultural logic to play out the conflict. And much like how, I think war is connected, largely with men. And therefore, it's much easier for the worlds in which we live to leave women out of a lot of the decision-making positions. Although I think women occupy these positions quite naturally in the time of conflict within our own societies. The question remains whether we are allowed to retain those positions after the conflict is dissipated a little. I'm sorry, is someone saying something?
No, please go on. And Dr. Swarna, you're muted.
Okay, am I audible now? Hello?
Yes, go on.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. So I think for me, both as a woman as an artist, the ruminations about peace and conflict is very now and here. And as I create work, and I think I'll talk about it more when you ask me more questions later, this whole idea that our society sets into a certain value system, sort of buttressing a gendered status quo that was pre-conflict, right? And conflict sort of altering that. And therefore, post-conflict, our worlds have to come back to that. And using culture, particularly arts, and more specifically performing arts, as ways to buttress back into that status quo, and women playing that major role. All of those has been problematic for me. Although I believe that the same women who do this can also have a great role to play in dialoguing between societies. And I think what has largely been for me in the India-Pakistan conflict in the recent, that has been an eye-opener in many ways. I'm sure people who've witnessed the India-Pakistan conflict for longer years from its origin would have more insight. But for me, is how the entire movement loses its potency. This whole war and conflict loses its potency when the citizens, and particularly women, are able to connect with each other at a more personal level. And I think social media in some ways has been helpful, although it has also had its own ways of fueling this. I will talk more about this as we move forward, but I think the thought that I would like to leave or open with is to place women at the heart of both the conversations around peace and conflict as sort of negotiators, whose roles can be more expansive than sort of having a motherist narrative of being sort of the cultural warriors of their own communities or their own societies. And therefore, anything that happens to that society is indirectly a reflection on or an insult on the culture of the women as such, right? So I think I'd like to place that burden off of our shoulders, and through my own work, that's how I reflect on peace and conflict and women's roles, particularly from conflict zones, how they negotiate using other forms of everyday dialogue and art to negotiate both with conflict and within their own communities and the world outside.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swarnamalya. Let's just have Rochelle Potkar, and then we will quickly have Haiqa.
It was so wonderful listening to all of you and thank you, Noor, for inviting me. Good evening, everybody, online and in person. When Noor invited me, I think the first thing I observed about myself is the hesitation to talk about peace. And I was wondering why, because a lot of times it starts with one person and it becomes a collective eventually. So Noticing the microscopic behavior of yourself tells you a lot about what the world, why is it hesitant to talk about peace? Because once mistrust sets in, who's going to thaw that and break the ice and send the olive branch? And so this, I think, is a very brave evening. Whoever has conceptualized this, I think it is, I thought it was early, but it is already too late. And every time there is some unrest, we should talk about peace immediately. And it is so difficult because it means we talk about trust. I collated some of my thoughts and I hope I will finish them in 2 minutes, because there was so much of cacophony around what is peace, what is conflict, not just only in the context of being a woman or about the marginalized, but what is the macro aspects of war and peace, because that's how the trickle down effect happens. So for me, I realized only questioning and looking at what's happening at the borders is one way. But I was wondering about what happens at the apex of the pyramids, from where the trickle down comes to the base. Because there are only two ways you can go: ground up, which is so difficult, or top down, which is so easy if the right decisions are taken. I was just collating something, and I hope I'll fit within that time. When I think of peace, I think of it in two strains: its philosophies and its economics, also in its antonyms of hatred, war, terrorism, and its economies. Now, I thought a lot about economies. Who benefits from war? Is the economic gain from hatred more than it is from peace? Should peace be weighed in economics at all? I've been grappling with this every time I watch the world, wherever and whenever there is conflict. On the balance scales of humanitarianism on one side, economic pursuits on the other side. Who are the beneficiaries of hatred? Is it the defense contractors, arms manufacturers, surveillance tech? Is it extremist groups radicalizing the unemployed? Is it propaganda machines creating fake narratives? Or is it the reconstruction companies who reconstruct after all the destruction? But peace, I gathered, has greater economics, because it is all metaphysical. It benefits everyone with safety, prosperity, happiness. But only its rewards are very long term. In this day and age of instantaneity, or should I say the goldfish attention spans of gratification, I fear that peace shouldn't become a rhetorical question against on ground organized transnational terrorism, even global terrorism. It shouldn't become a facade or a swan song, because peace is the only hope and only path in this terrifying world. When I think of its philosophies, I think peace is everything we need, you need, I need, we need, because it is about love and joy, food and feast, family, art, movies, TV dramas. Let's not forget those dramas, poetry, songs, dance, success, scientific inquiries, robust GDPs, good infrastructure with no income inequalities, no religious disharmonies, no gender inequalities, women's safety, and children. I think about children a lot nowadays, embracing beautiful futures that we adults, the grown ups of the world, the so called grown ups of the world, will create. Modern education systems to be, so for them to be fruitful citizens in a world that's modernizing every minute through technology. But peace is also a child to me. And we have witnessed his limbs mutilated in Gaza, where it was kept alive but killed one hand, one leg, one eye at a time, placed in a polythene bag to carry it away easily, while someone somewhere was still discussing the lexicology of the word genocide versus massacre and how many syllables each word contains. We, the grown ups of the world, can choose either an upward spiral or a downward spiral, but not both, because we can't go in two opposite directions simultaneously. It's an untenable bipolarity. It's our own people, our own poor, our own marginalized, our own soldiers and armies at the borders. And nowadays, mistrust and hatred seems to be the easier instinct to harbor. And technology seems to be the new colonizer, with AI allowing for the fear of organized terrorism and technology. And when I think of the two coming together, I fear it even more than AI, because they keep saying AI will replace jobs. I'm more worried of what will happen if it shakes hands with with terrorism. Whereas love takes work, trust even more work once it is broken. And I might be a naive poet here, envisaging a world free of terrorism and hatred, eradicated like chickenpox and polio. I believe that despite the hostility and mistrust, peace and love can still prevail. Trust can still seep in, like under the closed door, like light. The recent Pahalgam attack threw away whatever good was being built. We saw it. But I still believe that peace is actionable, an attainable quest, very doable, for an upward spiral. From the epics of powerful pyramids, places of power and decision making, peace is a foolproof decision that can trickle down to the middle and lower rungs and the margins and borders. It's easier that way. If it has to be ground up effort from the base of the pyramid to the epics, it will take years and centuries. But I think we will be ready, because that is too much for us and too good for us and important for us. Peace has to rain from the top and harvested like rainwater to the grounds below. War will marginalize everyone because winter came and went, and a second winter and a third winter is coming. It can be the winter of climate change, Manzoor. It can be the winter of natural calamities. We cannot help it. But it should never be the winter of a nuclear war, a cold bottom of the deepest well from where nothing shall ever return. There can be only one fundamentalism, and that should be of peace. And peace should always be given 100 chances, because its economics is deep humanity, joy, spiritualism, and happiness, and not feeling lonely in a world disintegrating through fast technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Do you think we just quickly have your thoughts on what peace and conflict means to you?
I think I am very impressed by what has been shared so far. And I think that a lot of points have been raised, which are important and which we know we need to have to go further. To me, peace and conflict, if we just look at the recent conflict between India and Pakistan, one of the things that I think is indicates how the moment we have conflict, we do get a certain sense of nationalism, especially with India. Nationalism that, which we got in school, where the Indian media went berserk, to say mildly, and the Indian administration, politics. And we always say in Pakistan that we weren't like that. Our media was better. But we say we won the war, and they say they won the war. So this becomes a point of understanding or non-understanding what war and peace is really about. I didn't think anybody won the war. I think both lost the war. Both lost in the sense of they succumbed to the most base feeling and base attitude towards each other. It is very base to think that you can beat the other person. It's very base to think that you can cow the other person, that you can harass the other country. And that, I think, is a cowardly thing. I've lived through many conflicts that we've had with India. The 1965 war, which actually was very crucial in deciding what was India and what was Pakistan. Prior to that, there was no question of having visa. It was a very open border, and it was a lot of coming and going. And that is a phase that I've written about, etc. And then in 1965, there was the war. And after that, the visas and the closing of the war. So that after that, we needed citizenship, etc. Prior to that, we didn't need citizenship. We just, went into one. And since then, we've had a very close border. Now, the border has opened sometime in the process, and in the process, it has opened with actually a lot of movement from people of both countries. I'm also a member of the India-Pakistan Peace and Development, PFPD. I'm also part of the Women in Conflict for Peace, the South Asian Women's Conflict Situation, South Asian Women for Peace, and the Institute of Peace Studies, which I run Interpol, with focus on South Asia. So I have my own involvement with peace that we have been at many levels, and with peace and conflict. And I look at each in through a gender lens. To me, it's very important that we do this, if we look at things not just from a gender lens, but look at it from minorities, look at it from the subjugated, the oppressed, etc., of how they think of peace. If we look at our own country, we don't have peace within. India doesn't either, and we don't have peace within the country. We have the Rajasthan, we have the terrorism attacks on us, we have the Pakhtunkhwa, we have the PTM in Pakhtunkhwa in Pata, and we have murmurings of conflict in Sindh, which was recently came up a bit. Now that type of conflict that you have has to be resolved within the country, but it also is connected with other parts of it. Both the countries will take advantage of any weakness that you have at any level. So this narrative that we say that India is involved in Pakistan, India may well be involved, but if you all struggle and you all, they can only be involved if there's a movement going on, if there's something wrong here. Just as we cannot be involved in India unless there's some movement there, because you could only get involved to sustain that movement. I think that I grapple a lot with the issue of peace and conflict and I teach it too, but I haven't come to. I mean, for instance, I just give you an example that when I first went to India to talk about peace, which was in 1979, I had gone earlier to India in 1962, but I went in 79 with the purpose that I'm going to get to know the Indians and we're going to move towards something like a reconciliation, a people-to-people reconciliation. I was there for 3 months, and there I found that in Delhi in particular, they were very, they internalized the state narrative, that Pakistan was under Haq, with all the women were in Parda, whatever they learned about Pakistan. And they were reluctant to meet me. Even friends of mine that became friends in Delhi, they were reluctant to meet me. And so we worked on them and they became the most, big leaders of the peace movement from India. But this reluctance is something that I grapple with, how much we internalize the state narrative. And we are sitting here all interested in peace, but we are in a minority. People do want peace in this country. They just don't. They don't have the ability to point it out, ability to articulate it. I'm not too sure what I'm saying here. Not too sure what I want to say, but basically I want to say that the one I congratulate you that you're interested in peace is important, and that you're raising issues, and the speakers in particular were very impressive of the type of issues they have raised. The issues that we have raised have been similar. We've had artists across the borders, we've had theatre across the borders, we've had art, dancing and dance across the borders. We've done all the things that, how do we connect up with them? And it's been a success. It's been a success on both sides of the border that we've got these connections. And I think we are very impressed to have built this platform to actually discuss this across the border. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My question is actually now to you. And the question is that there has been a brief mention of the roles that women occupy. So, the question is basically that when you've worked on contract for the past many decades and many years, So what role have you usually seen women occupy, gender minorities, or the Palestinian community occupy when it comes to conflict and wars?
Well, I think women have been, people like us have been very involved in the peace movement. And women like us have been very involved in the peace movement, but looking at it from a gender lens. So there's been a difference between how men think of peace, say with India, or think of peace within the country, and how women do. For example, during Jawal Haq's time, the men were not as threatened by Jawal Haq as women were, because men get Islamization, and you have, I mean, for instance, if you had food or pressure, such as what women could wear, that did not affect men. If you had the issue of can women play sports, it was not against men. So men were able to negotiate themselves very differently to how women were. Women had to demonstrate, women had to come out, women had to fight for their rights, but men did not actually do that. In our social circle, our political circle. I find that negotiating peace is, it's, I want to say it's difficult, but on the other hand, coming together in any forum is easy as long as the more we understand each other, the more we can move forward. My own sense of, I can't think of peace with individuals. I think of individuals, all of us, as being very multifaceted. We are geography, we are poetry, we are literature, we are activists, we're academics, all of these things. And if we reach out at all of these levels, we are not making an impact, but we're able to understand what it means for conflict in the other country.
Thank you so much. So now that we're on the topic of the role that women usually have when it comes to conflict, Dr. Swarnamalya briefly mentioned about it in her answer to the first question. So Dr. Swarnamalya, your usual performances, your preliminary performances, they usually showcase very strong female voices and female symbolism. So I guess the question could be, do you think that traditional art and classical art forms like the Bharatanatyam can become a medium to remember these roles and these stories that women usually have?
Thank you. Not just traditional arts, but I think any art, any sort of engagement with the arts, I think has tremendous potential in creating a platform, a place for the dialogue around peace. Of course, in my own performances and my research over the years, I can talk about my personal experience, right? So many years, almost a decade and a half before I set foot in Lahore for the very first time 2 years ago, I had already started working on the shared cultural ties between between the neighbors, right? The subcontinent. And I had recreated the lost dance forms. So consequentially, every time I presented these dance forms anywhere around the world, but also particularly in India and in the interior parts of India, I naturally had to share the context and share the stories that go with these representations. And it raised eyebrows and also a tremendous amount of curiosity. The traditional quarters, of course, were a little skeptical, but because it came with such a strong historical and research backing, there was very little they could do to confront it or to stop it from reaching the ears of the younger generation. But I think women particularly, but also young people in general, respond very differently to these shared cultural narratives. And to me, I think that is where I take my hope from, even in the most bleak of times. So, such as this, right? For example, just a few months ago, as I came back from my second trip to Lahore, and I was sharing my stories with everyone, talking about the kinds of collaborations that are possible, and the kind of artists I met, the people, the cultures. I had a union government officer who had come over to do some paperwork with me. And as I mentioned about my trip and my experiences, he said, "Oh, you went to the enemy country." And then I stopped him in his tracks and I said, "It's not the enemy country. It's just that, politically, we are probably at loggerheads, but, there is no enmity between the people after all." And then I went on to give him a narration of the kind of hospitality that I was offered and the kind of relationships that are possible. And of course, also harking back on some of the cultural ties that cannot ever be severed, right? Although they are fractured at various parts. He left feeling a little confused about his position. And to me, moments like that, even though they are very small, I feel are a great way to bring back people into this discussion in an affirmative, but also not in an aggressive, but an affirmative way. And therefore, for me, performance at large and any art practice is like retelling of a story, right? So you are in many ways using storytelling to rehumanize these relationships that are fractured between two nations, that are fractured between two warring or conflicting zones. So often collaborating with other artists so when I came to Lahore this time, from my last time to this time, I had met so many artists and we were talking about collaborations, and I shared with them some of my findings and my work over these years, even before I set foot in Pakistan, to talk about the shared cultures. And this excited us. And for me, I think these are how, we can talk about, this is the only way we can talk about, cross-border peace and conflict conversations uh, at the non-political level. Of course, the political language is of power, but I think the language of the arts, particularly the language of performing arts in my case, is a language of memory. It's a language of emotion. It's also a language of possibility. So for me, this idea that women are at the center of these enterprises, for me, I work with particularly women artists from everywhere. I look for them because as our speaker ahead, so rightly mentioned, I think the way women look at conflict is so markedly different from the way men look at conflict and the conversation around peace, therefore, right? So we embody a certain possibility of survival that does not necessarily eschew a language of power, eschew a language of resistance, of violence, but it speaks of a possibility where things need not go back to status quo, people's egos need not be assuaged, but at the same time, we can move ahead, not necessarily having one clear winner, right? And we are used to negotiations and reconciliations of that sort in our personal lives. Women from across both conflict zones and non-conflict zones, I think we are united by this lived experience of having to live within patriarchal worlds. So I think if we harness that and if we use the power of storytelling, whether it be through poetry, literature, performance, or paintings, or any form of art really, to start telling the human stories, and which is what I do. I mean, when I talk about the arts and when I contextualize my work, I talk about the stories that are so critical in putting these performances in place and holding them in history for so long. And what that does, it ignites not just curiosity, but a certain sense of shared cultural atmosphere. And for me, that is very critical. Noor, you and I, we connected on those lines as well. So I think the possibility of these are so much more exciting for me and hopeful, rather. One of the things that again and again that came back to me during the recent India-Pakistan conflict, of course, from back in India, the narrative around how women were regarded around the conflict, including the woman who supposedly headed the Operation Sindoor from our side, right? She was belittled soon after by one of the ministers of the dispensation, who went on to speak in disparaging terms about her own position as a Muslim woman within India. So, it got me really thinking about what positions do women take within these conflict zones. And as an artist, for me, it is important to create work or to look at work or to use my voice as an artist to delve in those moments where the emotions of people, not in the larger context of anger and conflict and fear, but also in the personal emotions that people have, in the loss of connections that people will suffer, in the kinds of personal loss that people will have. I think a lot of the narratives around even the partition stories are now focusing a lot on the oral histories and the personal stories of loss, right? And in that, people are able to also find healing. So I think art has the capability to, of course, to stage a large narrative of peace and conflict and peace and war, but I think to use it as a voice to tell smaller stories, to tell the more powerful, the more hidden, the more marginalized stories, and really showcase the predicament that people face during conflict, right? You are necessarily torn between two warring nations when you yourself do not want to participate in it, right? And so what happens to identities, what happens to people, particularly how are women and women's positions manipulated within these spaces? I think these are powerful stories to be told, and the more we share them, I think through the arts, I think the more we have the capacity, we will have the capacity to humanize conflict. And I think it's very important to humanize conflict, because when we dehumanize it, I think it becomes gargantuous in front of our eyes. It becomes nuclear. It becomes a sort of a thing, that a beast that we have no access and control around, right? It's true in the larger sense we don't, but I think at the more personal level, if we start to humanize stories around conflict, even during conflict, I know it's hard, but I think some of us, who have the voice, who have the capacity, if we continue to keep these voices alive, even during conflict, I think uh, we can bring down the intensity of how people suffer during conflict, right? Nations are bound to suffer. I mean, for as long as there's going to be conflict, nations and borders are going to suffer. But the interpersonal dilemma that people go through, the loss that people go through, I think that can be minimized, if not completely negated, if we are able to continue to keep those stories. And what I mean by stories is performances, art, poetry, things that talk about the other without othering them. And for that, I think the kind of work that I do, I mean, I take great strength from the kind of art that I practice, the kind of historical resources with which I lean. Most of the time, and I have to talk about neighboring countries, unfortunately, I work with archives because I don't have access. But recently, in the last couple of years, because I've had the access to come to, say, Pakistan, for example, I've had a more rich experience of meeting artists, collaborating, talking with them, really talking to people and understanding the atmosphere. And therefore, I think my narratives around what I share now is more rich. And I share it with students. I share it with youngsters who continue to perform. So if you go to a village temple here in Tamil Nadu, where, say, for example, one of my students is performing, she would invariably talk about the shared cultural history between, the Mughals, and how the salam is part of Sadir and Bharatanatyam. And she would effortlessly slip into doing that as part of Bharatanatyam in the temple. And so, so she is normalizing a lot of these otherwise very difficult conversations. And she's doing it with the kind of strength that she draws from history and shared cultures that we've had. And I think that's why it's important for us to continue both academically as well as artistically to keep this conversation alive. And some ways, sometimes I think that's the only channel that, although that is threatened to at many levels, that's the only channel that still lies within our own ambit. Even though it's heavily censored. So I believe that both as an artist and a woman, for me to continue to speak about shared cultures and peace now more than ever is so critical. I am not speaking about the larger conflicts and the larger, the genocide that's happening, because, I mean, that's another conversation to be had in entirety, right? But I think if we zone in on, say, the Kashmir conflict, if we zone in on the India-Pakistan, every one of these conflict zones have so much similarity also in the way women suffer within these conflict zones, right? So for me, that also is of a great interest. So I'll leave you there.
Thank you so much. So my next question is to Dr. Haiqa Nasir. So you said that you've been a part of different contemporary feminist collectives of Pakistan, including being a volunteer for Aurat March. So in May, जब conflict अपनी peak पे गया और उसके बाद ceasefire हो गई, what would you say was the initial, what was the initial feminist reaction? Because I mean, as we talked about, being an activist is also a role that women play in conflict situations. So was it like आपने किसी चीज पे stance clear करना है, was it amplifying the voice of a marginalized community or something differently, something else? So basically, when the conflict initially started after the Pahalgam attack, सबसे पहले तो obviously we condemned the Pahalgam attack in Kashmir because knowing the history and the extremism that is growing in India, we knew कि इसकी repercussions Kashmiris को ही face करनी पड़ेगी. और फिर as it escalated into the war that we saw, जिसकी वजह से इतनी misinformation फैल रही थी, there was a lot of confusion because एक point में we were also very confused and we were also very you could say out of our depth when we saw how poorly the media was responding to it, right? Especially the Indian media. So we were like, what is happening? How do you even talk about resolving the conflict when दोनों ही states की media ने जो थी तहरीकी पिछाई? So in Pakistan, of course, Pakistani journalists were still maybe covering it much better than the Indian media. But the amount of incorrect coverage, the misinformation, it really made things worse, and it really sort of fanned the flames of this divide between, Musliman or Hindu. कि ये मुसलमान और हिंदुओं के बीच का this is a conflict between Hindus and Muslims and not between two states that are fighting over Kashmir. And in all of that, what was happening was that Kashmir was just this collateral, right? The focus just turned to, there's two nuclear powers fighting, and nobody was talking about how the cross-border shelling, the attacks were causing more damage in both Indian-occupied Kashmir and Azad Jammu and Kashmir. And so our stance was to first sort of try to tackle the misinformation that was going around and to not fan the flames of this anger that was being generated in the media, in how the nationalism was being just, it was being fueled by medias on both sides. And you could see the narrative shifting because even people who were relatively, talking about peace and resolving the conflict eventually changed their voices to now we will have to answer. Now this is getting out of hand. No, how can they say that anymore? Because the propaganda was working on them. And we saw so many influential voices that were first saying, this is an overreaction. India needs to investigate the Pahalgam attack. They can't just take actions like this or make attempts like this or, start a war without proper investigation or proof of what they claim. But obviously that went unanswered. There was no open or transparent investigation happening. And then we realized, okay, nobody's actually listening to the people in either country. The state has completely gone off the rails. And we saw that, and we saw how, so for Pakistan, what really, really worried us was the fact that this one attack by India was going to fuel the militarization for the next few years in Pakistan. Now we know कि budget कितना increase हो गया, कितना हमारी education से हमारी दूसरे resources जिसमें resources that we actually need to build our country or to sort our stuff out from the inside out are going to be directed into this patriarchal view of security. Oh no, we need to strengthen our borders. We need to pump more money into countering drone technology, into countering this and that. And where does that leave us? It leaves us with a country where the people are deprived of good education. They're deprived of basic health resources. Their unrest is going to grow even more
because at one point that militarization isn't going to be feeding any people. It's not going to be addressing the healthcare issues of the people in the country. And this is what actually scared us. When this conflict happened, when the war happened in May, this is what scared us. The repercussions of this are going to be seen for the next few years, and it is going to cost us heavily. Just this small bash of egos between these two giants, nuclear giants, is going to cost Kashmir, and it is going to cost the normal humans of both countries, the normal people, जिनको peace भी चाहिए, we can't afford to be in a war. We cannot afford the rates, the inflation that all of this budget diversion is going to cause for the common man. But for some reason, our countries refuse, or our states, our governments refuse to, look at that. And it makes me think that maybe that is the whole point. If you keep the people stupid, you keep the education to a limited point, you make sure that all of the people who come on your media, on your shows, on your panels, give you bite-sized opinions. They're the same retired bureaucrats, the same retired generals who give the same retired professors who give you the same bite-sized opinions in every different channel, and everybody's happy. Yes, I was thinking right. No, this is right. I need to give more money to the border patrol because this is what's needed right now. And it's the same cycle over and over again, and it's just consistently training this. So as part of the feminist community, there was a lot of panic about, there were a lot of discussions about how this is going to affect us in the coming years. We were also having discussions, we were also reaching out to feminist collectives in India. Statements were issued, so there were a lot of joint statements issued, not just All at March, PAF, WTF, and collectives from India who were communicating with each other. We were talking about how this is being framed, how this is going to affect our people, and what we can do to resolve it. So the first point was to make sure that everything is transparent and to make sure that people do understand what misinformation is and how the propaganda is going to affect them eventually. So for that, for those few 5 to 7 days, everybody was मैं पाकिस्तानी मैं मर जाऊंगा पाकिस्तान के लिए, and everybody's like ये भी हिंदू देश हम तो रोन देंगे पाकिस्तान को. But once everything settled down, and once the international media also stepped in and said, what is happening here? And then, of course, Pakistan also nominated Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize for apparently resolving this conflict. I don't know what kind of, we're living in very interesting times. So when all of this happened, I feel like everybody just felt a lot more stupider. Because in that moment, we realized that it is so easy to make people believe the things that you want them to believe if you don't give them the tools to educate or to question or to criticize the things that are happening in their country. And we saw this in India. We saw how ridiculous the media propaganda got. We saw this in Pakistan when we saw even very well-known, well-spoken people who would always be the voices of, peace, were changing their narrative to basically go out the state's narrative. So that is what was working for us. And we also wanted to make sure that the shift would come back to Kashmir, right? Because Pakistan se jo shelling ho rahi thi, all the cross-border firing, this was injuring Kashmiris. This was destroying Kashmiri homes. This was destroying Kashmiri land. And somehow it was still not about Kashmir. Somehow it still ended up being about Hindu Desh and Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And I feel like that was intentional. That was just bait. Kashmir was just sidelined entirely in this entire conflict. So that's what my thoughts are. I hope that makes sense.
It does make sense. So one thing that I really like that you highlighted was the national identity, especially in the conflicts shuru hote hain, there's a very reactionary response suddenly the leftists and the liberal people, suddenly we're Pakistani or that we're Indian, and the national identity becomes very strong. So today we have the national identity side pe, and then we also have the gender identity. So we've talked about how the gender identity, it can be reflected through art and the story that, like let's say agar hum Bollywood movies dekhte hain, we relate to something. And maybe some people from India, they see Pakistani dramas, the PTV dramas, and they relate to something. So we are aware that we have a shared past, a shared colonial history. And I think these things can really be highlighted through art, especially literature, that Rochelle has the master in. So my question is actually from Rochelle now, and it's that the poems and the writings that Rochelle has done in the past and is doing, it really highlights the Indian experience of being a woman. So I was um, the work that Rochelle has done, it really highlights what it means to be an Indian and what it means to be a woman living in India or a girl living in India. And as someone who's Pakistani and has read her work, it makes me think, the girls that are experiencing in India, I have experienced those same things too. So the question basically is, okay, how do you think, how can a writer or even, let's say, as in Swarnamalya, as a dancer, how can we use these platforms and these different means of things to actually emphasize a shared collective identity? Like, it doesn't have to be a gender identity, it can be, there's Hindu in India and there's also Hindus in Pakistan. So maybe we can kind of overcome the artificial national identity and focus more on different, more important, perhaps, identities.
Thank you, Noor, for this question. I must start when I think about stories. The story that affects me the most is Toba Tek Singh's, Manto's story and the character of Toba Tek Singh. Because then he was talking about the lunatics and how they were viewing partition or traumatic um, political events. And I feel now a lot of people have gone lunatic. And there are many Toba Tek Singhs, and it's a lot of uh, misconstruction and misinformation, and the lunacy is at a different level because of also technology and its amplifications on screens and its live streaming. But coming to literature, a lot of Pakistani literature in my earlier days of reading has influenced me, Manto, Chugtai, and many modern Pakistani writers as well. Uh, I must say, talking about literature, that when I had gone to Iowa in 2015, my fellow writer was Haris Khalik. And it was a pleasure talking to him, and also a pleasure talking to all my Pakistani students in the between the lines, Noor, and you know that because our stories are so similar, and because of the shared heritage, the shared language, the shared culture, the shared idioms, uh, they seemed like our own stories, right? I mean, because we are those estranged, awkward cousins. 77 years ago, some separation had happened, and we are these awkward cousins who, when we meet outside our borders, in the framework not of the India Pakistan borders, but in a Dubai or in an Iowa, we are together. We just gel together. We have nothing, no hang ups. The hang ups of everything starts, the whole memory of it starts when you are across the borders, because then you remember everything. And we remember 77 years, we remember 79 years, we remember partition. We're still moving through the trauma of partition. And I think that every time a new attack happens or something, it crumbles those pack of cards of peace, those house of cards which we are trying to build. It crumbles, but again we have to build it again and again. But I remember translator, a French translator, was speaking to me about, as she was translating different Englishes, and she was translating, and she said this, that the Pakistani English and the Indian English has the same sentence constructions, but this is it, because the other Englishes are so different. Like the Sri Lankan English is very different in the way it's constructed, or the Irish English, or the Australian English, or the British, or the American English. But how come Pakistani English and Indian English has the same sentence constructions? And she had to use the same techniques of translation. And I that was a very small thing, but also a very large thing, because imagine all the Englishes that have been adopted and adapted in different countries. We share this, that a translator knows about it. But there are so many things that I think about, that stories can do, literature can do, and it has done. It has knifed through all the noise, and it has resonated because we had a shared heritage. We still have a shared heritage. We are from the subcontinent, and all our problems are almost similar, whether it is economical problems, infrastructural problems, women's safety, children. I mean, honor killings is something that is currently traumatizing me, because in India nowadays I come across facts of super achieving girls being killed because it is dishonoring. I have never heard or never conceptualized or thought of such a thing. Ki how could this be something super achieving? How can that be a dishonor? But we have those kinds of honor killings as well. But there are so many economic parameters, cultural indicators that both India and Pakistan need to look at. I feel literature helps because it's the soft power. It so easily gets into our psyche because we are all either story creators or story consumers. We love stories, we love poetry. I do remember, however, one thing: I have never visited Pakistan. The last time I had gone to Iowa, I'd come back and I wanted to create a artist residency program, and I wanted to have it in South Asia by inviting even the Pakistan, fellow writers. And there was somebody from Pakistan herself who was guiding me, and she told me, "Don't even think about it, because the effort you would have to put in getting those visas approved would take away any taste you had in creating this residency, which is, of course, a labor of love." And I didn't do it, so I didn't do it. I did it with only the Indians, and it was a beautiful residency. But I wanted to create a kind of a mini Iowa by having, many countries come in a cultural residency, something, a small little, miniature Iowa. But I couldn't do that. And that's when I realized that literature perhaps is the easier way, because what you need to do, the projects to execute them in reality, are so much harder and tougher, because they get stuck in bureaucracy and I don't know what else, biases and every kind of thing. But to write a story that resonates, it just knifes through so many barriers to reach somebody, for it to resonate between cultures, between countries. So I think literature is so powerful. It has always been powerful.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. So we're kind of running out of time. I had a lot of questions initially, but what we're going to do is now we have a few people in online who will say their comments that I've especially asked, if they can speak to those here. So we have their comments and any questions that they have, and then we'll have from here, the ones who are sitting in person. First up, Sir O.P. Shah, can you please unmute? I think he left. Okay then.
Please tell Ms. Salima Hashmi so that we can request her to take such a session in Praz Mela as well.
I was about to. Ma'am Salima Hashmi, would you please like to say a few comments? And I think a lot of people will want to hear them.
The internet meeting.
Please unmute, you muted.
If nobody else is speaking, I'll just put in my 2 bits worth. I've been listening, absolutely fascinated with what people have said. And of course, one agrees so much, having spent a lifetime in this whole struggle. So my question always after every conflict is not who loses, we know who loses, who gains from the conflict. And once you make that list of who gains from the conflict, I think you start getting a clearer picture of why it happens periodically, why it happens specifically when things begin to look better, when writers begin to talk together, when artists begin to meet. That should make us fairly clear on the business of who are the stakeholders in war. And but I think that we who are the stakeholders in peace, I think we now have to look at alternative venues. I mean, some of them have been talked about, but we really have to, for example, artists like myself say, oh, but how do we physically carry work to across, the borders that are totally sealed. Currently, I think it's a 600% duty on any Pakistani art. And I think that goes to India, and anyway, it stopped. Well, we are talking through technology. So that makes me think, why don't we make it far more lively? Why are we not having South Asian exhibitions online? Why are we not having poetry discussions and poetry recitals online? Why are we not doing all the things that are open to us in terms of the arts online? I mean, we have to find ways around the states who are intractable. And this has to grow into a movement in which every evening there should be some kind of a meeting online of various kinds of citizens and peoples across South Asia. Because I also, to subvert the idea of India-Pakistan conflict, I now talk about South Asia. And like my good friend Kamala Basin, that I am a South Asian first, then I'm a woman, and then in good times, I'm a Pakistani also. So I think that we need to start redefining who we are. We are South Asians. So therefore, those who watch us on the sidelines, which is the smallest countries in South Asia, and they're disgusted with the way that SAARC has been held hostage to India and Pakistan's, misbehavior. I can only call it adolescent behavior. It's the boys with the toys misbehaving both sides. So I would suggest that we look at technology as a very viable and vibrant platform, and we make it live. And I'm a very ancient person, but those who are young, they know how this can be done. If Ali Sethi's Pasuri can become a hit all over South Asia, I don't see why there should not be dozens of things like that, both sides. I watch stand-up comedians from India all the time on the internet. Well, this should be done in a stronger way, so that there are people across South Asia listening to these stand-up comedians. That's my 2 bits worth. I think the baton is now moved from people of my generation to the younger lot. They're far more comfortable with the technology. They know how to subvert the state narrative. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words. We also have Sheema Kermani in the ones who joined online. So okay, so then I guess we can have questions from the in-person people.
Hello everyone, I hope I'm audible. So I will start by introducing myself, I believe.
Well, you can just say your name and.
All right, my name is Sana and I'm doing my bachelor's in international relations. So my question is, we know that conflicts are unavoidable in the current international arena. And so I'm going to ask the question that we know that we need to make policies that can help us avoid these conflicts, especially the affected ones. We know the most are the people who are women, especially for just in Pakistan, are very much affected because a gap is built and people can use that. So my question exactly is what policies should we make and how should NGOs pressure the government to build those policies? That's it.
And is this an overall question or one speaker specific?
Anyone who believes that they can answer.
Okay, would any one of the speakers like to answer this? Just a question about your question first. You're asking specifically how NGOs can pressure the government into making policy. I don't think they can, because Pakistan में जो है NGOs को इतना restrict कर दिया गया है, because obviously the funding and especially foreign funding के हिसाब से बहुत restrict कर दिया गया. So I do not think they have any say in
I could say in framing these policies, they do, of course, people who run these NGOs, people who are involved in them, they are on advisory panels for the government, so they can advise and do that. Mostly these policies have to be coming from the people as well, from the political parties, the political workers, and the people who can shape and frame these policies for the state. So that basically means sort of pressurizing the government to redirect funds, to redirect the national budget towards practices that would add up to what we want, what vision we want to see of peace. So that means increasing education. It means removing hateful propaganda from our curriculums, where the vision of partition of India and everything is framed as, ये कितने बुरे हैं, हमें आजादी मिल गई इनसे, ये हो गया, वो हो गया, which is जो propaganda हम बचपन से बच्चों को देकर आ रहे होते, so they never actually see it from any other way. You have to start from there. Otherwise, you're always going to be arguing with the grown up कि नहीं इतना हमारे पे जुल्म नहीं हुआ था, इतना नहीं हुआ था, because we're still stuck in the trap that the British left us in. The divide and rule concept, they turned us into Muslims and Hindus when we were all Indians. There was no demarcation in our culture, in our practices, in the way we lived our lives. Yes, हम लोग की festivities, my beliefs were different, but you will find the Christian community also observing Muharram. You will find them कि जुमेरात को वो दाता दरबार जाकर मन्नतें मांग रहे होते हैं. You will find the Hindu community doing the same at Lal Shehbaz Kalandar ka mazar, at Bhitai ka mazar. You will find that their cultural and their spiritual connection is still the same. But जो mindset हमारे colonizers हमारे दिन में छोड़ कर गए थे of dividing us into Muslims and Hindus, our states are using that to reinforce their own agenda कि हाँ देखो ये हिंदू चाहते ही हैं कि भाई मुसलमान खत्म हो जाए, हिंदू कहते हैं कि भाई ये मुसलमान जो है ये टेररिस्ट हैं, हमने इनको खत्म करना है, और हम उसी चीज में फंस जाते हैं क्योंकि हमने अपनी आइडेंटिटी भी यही बना दी है कि हाँ हम मुसलमान हैं और हाँ नहीं हम हिंदू हैं. उससे आगे हमारी कोई आइडेंटिटी बन ही नहीं रही है. We were one nation before that. हम लोग वही रोटी खाते थे, वही गाय भैंसे पालते थे, वही खेती बाड़ी करते होते थे. But obviously it has been exploited. So the policies that we need to frame for this need to come from the people, from activist groups, and from legislators, from people working on the ground who need to raise their voices and call out the government on their practices. अभी क्या होता है कि my government जब भी उन्होंने कोई bill pass करना होता है, it is barely scrutinized. It is barely, the public doesn't even know what they're talking about, because most of the time हमारी news को flush किया जाता है with opinions and discussions about things that will distract us from what is actually happening behind the scenes, right? So you will find कि अच्छा फलानी journalist ने बात की कि भाई ये journalist के ऊपर या मेंबर ने ये कोई लगा दी है नई regulation लगा दी है. Now you cannot talk about this, you cannot say this word, you cannot talk about that. And we find out about it after it has been passed. And unless there are activists on the ground raising, raising noise about what is happening, nobody pays attention. So, for example, the domestic violence laws, the child marriage laws, people actually made noise. Okay, listen, the Islamic Council of Jurisprudence, the ICJ, is going to try and stop this. The Jamaat Islami is advising against it. So activists on the ground, when they raised noise about it, this is something that cannot be stopped, is when you saw senators and you saw political party representatives tweeting about it or talking about it. That is when you saw people from PPP, PMN, and people, progressive politicians saying, okay, no, this is wrong, this needs to be passed, we cannot allow Pakistan to still have a minimum marriage age that is below 18. It's not right and it should be discouraged, etc., etc. So expecting NGOs to shape our policies isn't going to get us anywhere, because NGOs themselves, you also have to think about how when you are dependent on funding and grants from someone else, you are also liable to give them justification for where those grants and funding are spent. They also have the authority to ask you to not spend them in certain locations on certain things or however it is. And that is something that does create a conflict of interest over time. This is also why NGOs are starting to become so notoriously, like now it's right के तौर पे भी कहा जाता है. हमें पता होता है कि लोग NGO चला रहे हैं, मगर किसी को पता नहीं होता वो कर क्या रहे हैं. We don't see any tangible, substantial results. कि, oh wow, this NGO changed this thing or what. We don't. So that is my answer to your question. I hope that makes.
We have people online who are writing in the chat box, including Ms. Khawar Mumtaz. So if anyone online would like to ask questions or maybe say their comments, then please feel free to like turn on your camera and just ask.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Sheema and I'm from Karachi. I did send a message for Swarnamalya, but I don't know if you got it because it seems to have disappeared from here. However, I mean, I could hear parts of the conversation because, as you know, there's been this heavy rainfall in Karachi, and so our internet is very bad at the moment. But I just wanted to share and add to what was said by her earlier, that I think arts and artists can play a big role in conflict, in times of conflict. And obviously, we've done that a lot between the times between India and Pakistan conflicts on many an occasion. But and also, I also want to add to the fact that what was said by somebody else earlier, that women and women's perspectives on peace are so different to men's perspectives on peace. So if we can somehow move ourselves towards pushing for a space where women come into into spaces of decision making, when they can have some power at least and some say in at times, not only at times of conflict, but actually always, but especially when there are wars going on. If women can be given some or can fight for and get themselves positions of power where they can be into decision making, then I'm sure that moments of crisis and conflicts will be seen through different lens. Because we have always said no to wars. Women have always said no to wars, and So I just wanted to add to the conversation here that I think women can play a big role. I think art can play a big role. I think our shared culture plays a big role. I mean, I, living in Pakistan, perform Odissi and Bharatanatyam, and she mentioned that somebody in India, some of her students will be doing that when they do it in Tamil Nadu or elsewhere. They can talk about a different kind of greeting, so it doesn't always have to be namaskar. It can also be a salami. However, I mean, because I think it's these forms that are important for us, for people like us, for artists who believe in in this kind of a ideology, that art is a way to communicate and to bring moments of peace, of moments of harmony and bonding. The most important thing is that it creates moments of bonding between people, and I think that if we can do more of that, it will be absolutely wonderful. So I really appreciate this talk that you've been having. From whatever I've been able to gather, and thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Sheema Kermani. Yes, Ms. Mumtaz, please go ahead.
Hello, assalamu alaikum to everybody. I've been following this conversation and I'm really glad that it is taking place. I think nobody actually, ordinary citizens don't want conflicts because conflicts have a huge impact on their lives and disturb it. And if the source of the regional conflict is between two countries, we have to find out ways of keeping our connections and creating bonds, as Sheema just said. And earlier, Salima also was talking about that. So the point is, how can we do it given all the restrictions? And I think the only one way is, of course, through social media and the net, and more in a finding common avenues of bondage, because we do get swayed by what's happening around us, the hyper-nationalism, the hatred, etc. And we have to be very conscious of what really is beneficial to all of us, and which is peace. Recently, there was a webinar that I saw among young people, uh, where it was asked of them that what would you do if you became a president or a prime minister of your country, on every country of this region. And you would be surprised that most of them said that they wanted peace. Most of them said that they wanted peace to fight poverty, to fight all the ills that affect ordinary citizens. And their hope was also for a peaceful, productive future for all the young people. So I think the other important point that I've sort of come about to realize is that, the diaspora, when you go abroad, when you meet a Sri Lankan or a Bangladeshi or an Indian, there is an affinity, you immediately connect with them. How can we build that kind of connectivity and a momentum for peace amongst those people from our regions who are outside and have to face the conditions over there, wherever they're going, as a cultural unit, because culturally historically, we are all connected. So I think we have to explore new avenues, be creative about that. Art, literature, music, those three things are so connecting. So I think those are some of the things that I would just want to add on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're going to have questions again from here, from the in-person people. So we're going to have like 2-3 questions. And please keep the answers short because we're running out of time. If anyone wants to ask.
I just had a suggestion to when Salima, Hashmi, and Rochelle, but both are offline, and I can take the time to talk to Sarma. Meanwhile, can we? This is just a suggestion, like to Rochelle, if you can pass on later on. Yes, fine. So I didn't see any poem from Pakistan, not from India so far. I'm a poetry lover. I didn't see any poem on peace, especially after the war. So I just would love to put a suggestion to ask the poets to do their work and submit somewhere in the platform or online, or especially create an event. Similarly, an art performance. This is for Sarma. And for Ms. Salima Hashmi. Last time we had on Firaaq, we had Javed Akhtar Saab. And everyone see his statement after war. I don't blame him. He might have his reasons, maybe some pressures. But we need more people from India on this event. And Firaaq is the upcoming event, and we can ask more people from India to come forward. Let's talk on peace. Thank you.
Actually, Rochelle ने आज एक 4 मिनट लंबी पाकिस्तान और इंडिया पे point present करनी थी, but we ran out of time.
Oh.
So we have Anupam Batra from India. Sir, please ask, or if you have any comments, please do so.
Hello.
Hello, yes, please ask.
Yeah. Sat Sri Akal, Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. First of all, my heartiest compliments to the organizers of this event and initiating this dialogue, rather much needed dialogue. We've come a long way since 1947. And during these years, after more than 70 years, after having fought 3 wars, what lessons have we learned? the horrors of partition still haunt me. My parents, my grandparents were from Pakistan. I agree, even if the partition had to happen, why was there so much bloodshed? Why so many killings? The only reason that comes to my mind is there was no dialogue. And after that, whenever there has been a conflict, it has been a result because the governments were not talking. The people-to-people contact was minimal. Therefore, dialogue has to take place. And the cause for the recent conflict also has been because the dialogue was not happening. So in that sense, events such as this one should be encouraged, and I'm sure people on both the sides of the border would learn, would imbibe the lessons learned, and move forward and hold such meetings and dialogues. Now we blame the technology all the time, but it's because of technology that today I can see all of you and you can watch me here. We can use this technology for the betterment of people on both the sides of the border. I hope, wish and pray that this was the last time that we had a conflict. But even if we have a conflict in the future, it should be resolved through dialogue and not through arms. And here, I'm reminded of Sahir Ludhianvi's immortal lines. जंग मशरिक में हो या मगरिब में, अमने आलम का खून है आखिर. खून हिंदू का हो या मुस्लिम का, नस्ल आदम का खून है आखिर. इसलिए ए दुनिया के शरीफ इंसानों, जंग टलती रहे तो बेहतर है. हमारे तुम्हारे और सबके घरों में शमा जलती रहे तो बेहतर है. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, But we had someone in the audience. Please do keep it short.
For this session, my name is. Am I audible now? My name is Amar. I'm a student of literature and gender and sexuality studies. And mera sawal tha from Mr. Nighat. You mentioned that you've done work on the partition through a gendered lens, and also on the porous nature of the Indo-Pak border before the outbreak of 65 war. I was wondering, where can I access your work? Would it be available online? Should I consult a library? I'm interested in reading your writings.
Actually, we did have it online, but unfortunately, our website was hacked. And so one, of course, I do have an article this is getting back with me, you know my number, but then I can get full copy. That's one thing. The other is that I can give some references of work done in India on the same subject. Maybe even posting active news on subjective domain, like this amendment of the thing, you can photocopy that. So I mean, if you share whatever is on partition, it's going to be that. As far as India is concerned, Indian function in 65 war, it's quite complicated. It has been written in fragments in different places. I get it from those fragments. There was, and I get it also from my memory. So I'm 78. So I mean, I lived through all of that, and I lived through coming and going from India to And then 65 hours. The first time we see it as really an enemy. And I found it quite interesting is that just after partition, with enormous bloodshed, we actually had no way. For example, the magnitude in the war by intensity and people who were in the audience. And after the fight, we have a problem even with cricket, or problem with so I will try and get a you can definitely understand that sharing.
So so this was the last question. Dr. Haiqa and Ms. Nighat are here. If you would like to informally ask for something. So because we're out of time now, let's just wrap this up and there's tea on that side if anyone would like to have it. There's also some snacks there. And I'm very glad, and Rochelle has left us, but I'm really glad to Dr. Swarnamalya Ganesh, who has given her such precious time because you know.
Thank you for having me, Noor. And as Salima ji says, yes, we should do more of this. This is a wonderful, wonderful initiative. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Dr. Swarnamalya, and thank you to Dr. Haiqa, Nasir, and
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to have met everyone online.
Also, lastly, thank you everyone for attending. I never thought that people would actually show up. We're ending the online session now, and I'm really glad that we had so many people online too, who came and who went and who are still here. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that आगे जो भी future initiatives होंगे, we can all be a part of that, and hopefully through combined identity we can get over our India, Pakistan, Hindu, Muslim identity, and just work towards peace in South Asia. Okay, goodbye to those online and those in person. You can measure with it.
Anukunji, thank you. Thank you for coming.
I enjoyed the event. Thank you so much for sending me the reminder as well.
Thank you, Anukunji.
Yeah. A very nice event. I'll talk to you later. And
We owe
all
to
the best.
you.
Very well organized as well and conceptualized.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
वो देखे लीड पड़ी है लीड उठा दो लीड